Hi everyone, and welcome to MCC at Home. It's great to have you with us this morning. I appreciate you tuning in. This morning, pretty soon, I'll be kicking off on a talk on, of all the topics in the world, judgment. Yeah, that's right. And not just any kind of judgment, but you could call it Judgment Day. So that's what I'll be speaking on soon. Hopefully that's piqued your interest already. And then after that, I'll be moving to a special announcement that I have about MCC at Home and where we're going. So stay tuned for that. And now, the always popular, everyone always wants to talk about it, subject of judgment. So being a child of the 90s, I had a love affair, as so many people did no doubt, with REM. New Adventures in Hi-Fi is my favourite album of theirs. And that contains a much underappreciated song, New Test Leper. So Michael Stipe sings, and wasn't Michael Stipe something in the 90s? He was already like an elder statesman of the alternative movement. He was sought out by Kurt Cobain as a kind of mentor and friend. He was like the really incredibly cool uncle everyone wanted. Anyway, he sang, "I can't say that I love Jesus." That would be a hollow claim. But he did make some observations, and I'm quoting them today. "Judge not, lest ye be judged." What a beautiful refrain. End quote. Now that little snippet encapsulates the attitude that most of my non-Christian friends, and perhaps some of you watching, have towards the idea of religious/divine judgment. It's repellent. And also, it kind of sums up the idea a lot of people have about Jesus. He at least had some good things to say. But the idea of putting those two things together, combining them, Jesus and judgment, can be particularly repugnant to people. And that's usually due to the association of Day of Judgment or Judgment Day, the association those terms have with punishment, suffering, dividing people into righteous and sinner categories, or maybe the T2000, to throw in yet another 90s reference. This little talk is going to suggest that the idea of final judgment serves a different purpose. And while that purpose is going to be, I suppose you could say, experienced in different ways, it at least isn't going to resemble the kind of stereotypical caricatures that I just mentioned above. Now, if you've been following any of our talks on the Sermon on the Mount, you would have heard me mention numerous times the idea of the kingdom of God, and Jesus being the king, the ruler of that kingdom. So when he returns to fully usher in this kingdom, he'll be restoring everything to a perfect state. He'll be, to quote theologian Tom Wright, putting the world to rights. Putting the world to rights. That'll involve bringing about universal and eternal peace and justice. But of course, putting the world to rights and bringing about justice is going to involve judgment. I mean, we see that on a purely human plane, right? If I hurt you, if I unduly take advantage of you, if I exploit you, and I don't want to be held accountable for that, or I dispute that that is in fact what happened, then eventually I'll be brought before a court or some kind of tribunal, and some kind of judgment will be rendered in order to try to achieve justice, or the closest approximation to justice. There'll be an attempt, if you like, to put things right between us. But as theologian Tim Keller has pointed out, and as Michael Stipe has demonstrated, we moderns, if you like, or postmoderns, we often react quite differently. Keller suggests that we often struggle with this idea of divine judgment. And why? Because we've been weaned on the worldview that through science, our mastery of science, and technology, we can actually control and shape our world. And by extension, we can decide fundamentally what is right and wrong. I mean, if Elon Musk can colonize other planets, surely he gets the final say as to what constitutes right and wrong, good and evil in his life, right? That seems only fair. It seems strange to us, to our modern ears, that there's a higher power that he's somehow answerable to. And on top of that objection, many of us find the idea of divine judgment unpalatable, maybe even uncivilized. I mean, haven't we moved beyond simplistic notions of universal right and wrong, or victims and perpetrators, and especially punishment of all things? It can seem almost a little bit barbaric. But I wonder sometimes how much of that has to do with your experience and context. If, like me, you've never really been exploited, subjugated, or seriously abused, and if, again, like me, you've always lived in a peaceful and serene, secure environment, you can almost afford, again like me, to look down on judgment. It can seem antiquated, but it's not so much that judgment is antiquated as much as I've been so fortunate, so blessed, call it what you will, to live in such an exceptional context in history where I haven't ever really been wronged, not seriously. And if you haven't been seriously wronged, it's easy not to see the need for justice. And with that need for justice, the judgment that is needed to make justice happen. So that's true. The need for judgment hasn't really disappeared. I, and many of my peers, are just in this remarkable situation where we haven't needed it. And then we can draw the conclusion that therefore perhaps no one really does. And that is a bad conclusion. Does that make sense? I hope so. And without timestamping this talk, right now it seems that a lot of people are aware of the fact that justice and judgment matter. People have literally taken to the streets and said that wrongs have been committed and that people who have perpetrated those wrongs, they need to be held to account in order for justice to be served. So maybe we thought that judgment and all that goes with it was receding into the mists of history. But again, maybe that was just a little bit premature. Maybe, as it turns out, it's not all good, bro. It's actually not all good. Okay, how about we step back for a second and think about some possible consequences if there wasn't any kind of final or divine judgment, if there wasn't a kind of conclusive putting all things right. Well, I'd argue that a kind of futility, if you like, would remain hanging over the created order. If you don't believe in God or a higher power, then it seems likely that the universe will only continue to expand. The stars will eventually burn out, and matter is likely to collapse into black holes. Or even if you believe in a God, but only as a kind of a divine watchmaker type of God, the outcome is likely to be similar. Humankind's crowning endeavours, its ultimate achievements, will eventually all boil down to naught. Now it's important to see that this is a very different story to the one presented in the Bible, where the final judgment will involve all creation being delivered from its imperfections and flaws. So this is a story of renewal instead of eventual and unavoidable decay. Secondly, an absence of final judgment wouldn't only be detrimental for creation and, by extension, humankind, but also for individual humans as well. So Christian apologist John Lennox, he points out that it's an unavoidable fact that most humans don't get justice in this life. Now just stop and consider if you think that's true or not, because it's a pretty big claim. And if it is true, what the implications are. Again, given my privileged context, it's easy for me to assume that everyone must get the same amount of peace, security, resources, and justice as I do. But that's not true. Most people probably don't. Now, if there's no final judgment where wrongs are righted and justice meted out, it seems to mean that the majority of victims will remain wronged and that the majority of perpetrators will have, sad as it is to say, have gotten away with it. Now, just supposing that's true, how does that, without sounding tacky, how does that make you feel? To me, that would seem to be a tragedy of almost cosmic proportions. And further to that, a belief in final judgment doesn't just counter that sense of futility. It can also help stop the cycle of unjust retribution and revenge that can understandably kick off in the absence of a final and absolute judgment. So Christian theologian Miroslav Volf is an example of someone who experienced injustice firsthand, serious injustice, and relied on the certainty of a final judgment and reckoning to help him forgive in the present and not resort to revenge. So this can almost seem counterintuitive, but faith in a final judgment which leads to justice can help stem further injustices being perpetuated. That's the point, right? That's the point. So, putting together those reasons, you can hopefully see why the final judgment can be viewed as, and this is the way that it's described in the Bible, as a day of joy. Everything will be restored to God's good, original, and perfect purpose. This is the day's main function. But having this goal of making everything right and perfectly just means that there's really no room for evil. And by evil, I mean creatures who have stubbornly, persistently refused to say sorry and confess to God the wrongs that they've committed against others and Him. The pride and the arrogance that is kind of caught up with thinking that we don't really need God and that we can live according to our own definition of right and wrong, that's what I'm talking about. So judgment in this regard is less concerned with living a morally upright, good life and being a pillar of the middle-class suburban community. And it's more about admitting that we've all done bad things, just in different degrees. We've all wronged God and each other, including ourselves. Now, this may all be still understandably hard to swallow, but some of it comes down to being clear on how you think about God. Do you want a God who is concerned about justice and subsequently has the power to judge and eradicate evil? Because to me, surely that sounds a whole lot better than a God who is ambivalent about suffering, pain, and injustice, or, even more tragically, is impotent in the face of it, can't do anything about it. But if we want the former, it's going to have implications. A God who is so big as to be able to judge evil and is presumably going to be the final arbiter of right and wrong as a result. And a God who is going to eradicate injustice is also presumably going to be worthy of judging me. Now that may still sound dire and somber, but it's also not the whole complete message. The other part is that this all-powerful God who will judge and deal with evil also recognises that all of us, me included, are victims of evil as well as sometimes perpetrators. And He's made a way available to us to both save us from that evil and forgive us for the wrongs that we've committed. So as a result, churches should be full of people who live in the light of this saving and this forgiveness. So they shouldn't be full of morally upright people who have got it all together, nor are they populated, hopefully, by people who live with their heads in the sand and pretend that there's no such thing as injustice or a need for judgment. So I'd encourage you, if you're not happy with the current state of affairs, with the way that the world is, if injustice bothers you, or if you're not happy with how you even act sometimes, get yourselves to a church. Check it out. Come to ours. MCC, 10 a.m. every Sunday morning. You shouldn't find simple answers there. You shouldn't find arrogance there. And you shouldn't certainly encounter a denial of evil. Instead, hopefully, it'll be a community of people who are trying to make the world and themselves right via the power and the forgiveness of God. Now, if you've got any questions on this admittedly quite heavy topic, please, as per usual, just reach out via the email and we'll get back to you. But thanks for sticking with this as we talk about the tough, tricky topic of judgment. And now we'll move on to our special announcement. So we just wanted to give you an update as to what's happening with MCC at home. We're going to be taking a bit of a break from this format and experimenting with some other ways of delivering MCC at home. So 2 quick bits of news. If you'd like to tune in to a live stream of our Sunday morning service, if you'd like to be part of that, then please just click on this link below to register your interest and we'll make sure that happens for you. Secondly, probably not this week coming, but the week after that, we're going to be having new content, new stuff going up on our YouTube channel that'll be effectively the 3rd chapter of MCC at home. Now, if you'd like to get some of that, then again, please just register your interest by clicking the link down here below. And we'll keep you informed and we'll keep you up to date. So if you're interested in either or both those options, again, please just click this link. But thirdly, really, we would just love you to join us in the flesh, in person, assuming that you can, on any given Sunday morning. So we again, are Margate Christian Church, meet 10 a.m. to around about 11:15 every Sunday morning. It'd be great if you want to come along. By now, if you've been watching this stuff for a while, you will recognise, obviously, a heap of faces.
And voices.
And voices, so we'd love it. And that'll make like this little break a little bit easy for us to tolerate as well from both sides. So yeah, please come along and join us. Lastly, thank you for sticking with us via through this chapter of MCC at home. It's been great being able to deliver this stuff to you guys. We hope that you found it beneficial. That's our hope, that's our prayer. So hopefully we'll see you sometime soon. In the meantime, God bless.